then just fold unimproved. Okay, so he had ace high in the hand where I had queen 5 and turned the gut shot. Instead of betting it, he chose to check it back, and most likely he was looking to induce a bluff from me and pick it off. So I definitely don't think he was going to fold the river, but it's important to note how your opponent tends to play ace high unimproved in a spot just like that. There's sort of two approaches. One is to do what he did, and that's sort of like the more common no limit thing you might do, although you wouldn't do it as a total default. You would do it sometimes. In limit, you could do it as a default. You would be planning on not folding. But the other option is, on that board it comes 6-7 jack. He has, just because I check call the flop, there's no reason to believe I necessarily have a pair. And as you see, he still did have the best hand. That's a common situation to be in on a semi-coordinated board. So it's also very reasonable to bet ace high again for value and for protection in limit. You know, it's not as big a deal, obviously, to get check raised in limit as it is in no limit. In limit, usually if you're betting for value and you get check raised, you just call because it's just one small portion of the pot as opposed to a huge bet that might be the size of the entire pot. So it's just not a bad thing. It's not a disaster to get check raised. So if I hadn't picked up a gut shot in that spot, I would have folded a hand with 6 outs against him that would be close to correct to call. It's kind of a long discussion whether I should call there if I know I have 6 outs. But the point is, he didn't do that. If he habitually checks back ace high, hoping to show it down and induce bluffs, that's great if I can notice that, because what it means is I can call even lighter on the flop than I would, knowing I'm often going to see the turn and the river just for the price of the flop bet. It's a leak for him to consistently check back ace high on the turn, and I think that's something that no limit players will tend to do because it's more standard to play it that way in no limit. Also, it'd be wrong for him to constantly bet ace high. He's setting himself up to get check raised too often, and you just don't want to be too predictable. So your best opponents will vary what they do, but favor betting ace high against most people on the turn when your opponent just check calls the flop. You should usually bet ace high again unimproved. What to do if you get check raised is a difficult thing. That's probably beyond the scope of this discussion. But in practice, your opponents won't mix up their play that well. Certainly at the mid stakes, they'll tend to do one or the other. And I think most people will err on the side of betting, which is a lesser mistake than always checking it back. But both are mistakes. There's a little bit of a jump here in the recording. The king 10 hand, he just folded before the flop, and then there was another hand that was folded. So apologies for that, but this is an interesting hand. I get check raised, and I 3-bet his check raise. Why am I doing that? Well, I'm not doing it to bluff in this case. What I'm doing is hoping to realize my substantial equity against a range of hands that's not that strong that check raises me on that flop. Okay, first of all, I could have the best hand because any hand with a 5 or a 6 in it will usually be check raising. So like 10-5, Jack-5, etc. Those hands could check raise. And as well as, any pair here. So like a pair of 4s with nothing, a pair of 3s. And those hands will all probably shut down when I 3-bet the flop. So my plan is for the turn to go check and the river to go check unless I improve. If the turn goes check and the river, and then he bets the river, I would consider calling in on some cards, probably like some board pairing cards, things like that, that don't give him a wide amount of a wide spread of cards to hit for a pair. But my main thing was, I'm a 3-to-1 dog to improve. There's a fair amount of money in the pot. If I can just 3-bet this flop and then see the turn and river for free, some good stuff could happen here. Since his range should be, diluted enough to be pretty weak overall when he check raises an all rag coordinated flop. The implied odds probably favor me slightly. Also, when I hit a king or a 10, I will probably get paid off. I might even get a raise in. So instead, it just goes check, 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 and I got there against top pair, which is really nice, and tells me that my opponent is on the conservative side. Now he's checked back ace high in a spot where most people wouldn't, and he's shut down pretty quickly to raises. In fact, if you remember the king 9 hand, though that was more reasonable, when I flopped the open ender and made the nuts on the turn, he also shut down pretty quickly with a very big hand, top pair king kicker. So I'm going to be a little more aggressive with this guy in general. Pocket jacks is a monster, and it's much stronger in limit than it is in no limit, just because you can't be put in really bad situations. You build the pot early with very good equity, and now there's no question I'm going to showdown basically no matter what cards hit the board. When I get raised on the flop, my options are call and check raise the turn, or 3-bet it and move forward. I chose to 3-bet because I felt he could be making a free card play with either a small pair or ace-king, ace-queen type hand, and didn't want him to get away with it. Had he 4-bet me, I would have then gone to check and call mode, or had he raised the turn, I would have gone into check and call mode. When I get raised on the river, it's sick, but there's no chance I could ever fold there, and he had a very strong hand for the situation too. Take a lot of 2-outers and things like that and limit hold them just because you're constantly going to showdown. That hand was kind of interesting because he 3-bet me, bet the flop, and I was going to raise the turn, and then he just shut down on the turn. I 3-bet him with Jack 10 off. In limit, you really have to, your pre-flop 3-bets have to favor high card value. Not necessarily showdown value, like Jack 10 doesn't have a lot of showdown value, but it has high card value in that if it's often going to flop something that you'll feel comfortable going deeper into the hand with. So a pair of 10s, a pair of jacks, strong hand. Also, you'll often flop 2 overcards or 1 overcard and a gut shot. Well, you won't flop 1 overcard and a gut shot with that hand, but you get the idea. You just can't be 3-betting very often with 7-8 suited and hands like that. The other reason I chose to 3-bet that relatively weak hand was this guy seems to look for places to fold, and if you can find somebody like that and limit hold him, it's a good spot. So I decided to give him a chance to do that. This hand will tilt the crap out of you because there's like no way he can check fold this flop unless he had like only 1 overcard to the 6 with no backdoor hearts. So like 8-5, 4-5, something like that. I should get action there. To not even get a flop bet sucks. Here, his tendency to check ace high back rears its ugly head. He bets the flop, I call. I'm check folding the turn, and he checks it back. Well, I know he does not have a hand like pocket 5s, because it would be criminal to not value bet in that spot. And yet I know he probably doesn't have complete air because it's a good spot to bluff. So he really has ace high there like all the time, and I'm just going to play perfect against that. I get the perfect card, but I certainly would have value bet a 4 and would have bet a deuce with impunity.